All right, let me share my my screen here. And I am sharing PowerPoint share. Okay, so everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay, good. So this is week number 8. We're kind of getting through it. We're going to focus on chapter 31, the first couple verses. You know, we're getting towards the end. So as we're getting towards the end, you know, we're going to, you know, Moses is getting to the point where he's getting ready to, you know, turn the reins over to someone else. So if we've just kind of been following along with where we got, where we're at and where we've been, we're week number 8. So next week, we'll be finishing up. All right. So the key verses, because the focus really, of tonight is about, leadership transition. And you know, the theme is kind of preparing for new leadership. We have Moses, who's going to, not move into the promised land. And then we have Joshua that's taking over, and he's going to be the leader in the promised land. And so if we look at Deuteronomy 31:6, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Does that end sound a little familiar? Yeah. And then Deuteronomy 31:8, the Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Okay. If that sounds familiar, a lot of benedictions, you know, have come from Deuteronomy. All right. So if think about, you know, maybe a time where you've either experienced, known about, read about, whatever, of where there was a transition or a time of change. So think about leaders in that time period, and what are the qualities that you think were most important when that's going on? So you got a time of change, maybe a time of instability, and you have a leader there. What qualities are going to be important?
Well, they've got to be able to communicate with everybody
Uh,
and pull everybody together.
Okay, so they need to communicate and be able to pull people together. All right.
They have to believe in what they're trying to do.
Okay. So you think maybe they need to have maybe like a clear vision?
Sure.
But Mark is right, they have to be able to communicate that vision.
Okay.
So are you talking about leaders of the Israelites going into the promised land, right?
I'm talking about you, you know, your experience right now, or experiences that you've had, you know, personally.
Well, they not only have to be good communicators, they got to be good listeners.
Okay.
They have to be pretty intelligent.
Okay.
You've got to be willing to listen to others' opinions. They may not always be what they feel, but they should be able to at least listen to them and consider somebody else's opinion.
Okay. One of the things that I I would appreciate is being calm in the midst of anxiety,
Mhm.
in the midst of
It's
change.
a wee bit relevant right now.
Huh?
This is relevant right now.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. So, you know, whenever we go through change, you know, there's always a sense of um anxiety, sometimes a sense of chaos, and uh there's always that that you know, being
But as a nation,
a-
we've been through this before,
Sure.
multiple times.
Oh, absolutely. And this particular study is just it's happenstance that it's happening when it's happening.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's all of this stuff is pretty relevant to what's been going on. All right, any other qualities that you think would be important?
I think a leader has to have wisdom and the ability to be stern when things are chaotic, to direct. I'm thinking of things like the Titanic is sinking and the captain has to, give orders for people to do things even when it's difficult. So sometimes has to direct people to do things that they don't necessarily feel like they want to do, but to have the wisdom to know that that's the right thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else?
He needs to put leaders around himself that are strong and have the same vision as he, so he
Ah.
can delegate.
Got to have the right people on the bus
Mhm.
Mm.
Or the boat.
or the boat. All right. So let's
You said that the more things change, the more they stay the same.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the same for recipes, I hear. That no matter what thing, they all have the same thing.
Oh,
All right.
Herman is making Italian wedding soup.
Oh, okay.
When he's smiling, he's brewing something.
All right. So if you're in your Bibles and you want to turn to chapter 31, verses 1 through 8, or you can just look at it on the screen. I believe this is the English Standard Version.
Yes.
So Moses continued to speak these words to all Israel. And he said to them, I'm 120 years old today. Happy birthday to Moses.
Yeah.
I am no longer able to go out and to come in. How many of us feel that way and we're not 120? So, the Lord has said to me, you shall not go over this Jordan. The Lord your God himself will go over before you. He will destroy these nations before you, so that you shall dispossess them. And Joshua will go over at your head, as the Lord has spoken. And the Lord will do to them as he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, and to their land when he destroyed them. And the Lord will give them over to you, and you shall do to them according to the whole commandment that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land that the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall put them in possession of it. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. So as we kind of look at this scripture, what seems to resonate with you? What kind of insights do you gain from it?
Well,
No matter what happens, it'll always work out
Okay. Why will it always work out?
because that's what God wants it to be.
Okay, good. Because it's a God thing, not a people thing. Mark, were you going to say something?
no, yeah, just that Moses is about to die and that his successor is being appointed.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, he did the successor in front of everybody else so that everybody else knew that they were going to be taken care of.
Okay. All right, great. So, Moses is 127 or 120 years old. and has finally come to the realization this time as a leader is coming to it, coming to the end, and he's preparing for the transition. And his young protege Joshua is going to take over. And so Moses has a challenge. And the challenge is really to reach out to the people, you know, to provide them with some insight, guidance, wisdom, you know, all of those kinds of things, but also to encourage them to remain faithful. Because what can happen in a time of transition, you know, with the people?
Well, January 6th, 2021. Or
Okay.
or 20, you know.
Yeah.
People don't want the new leader.
Okay. Don't want the new leader, you know, sometimes a little reticent about following somebody else, have gotten, you know, think about it. How long has this group of people followed Moses?
Since he was 40, 80 years.
Yeah, well, they haven't been
40.
around 80 years. It's their 40 years.
Mhm.
So it was the previous generation and now this generation. And so if you're following somebody for a very, very long time, there's a sense of like comfort that's there, a sense of familiarity, and those kinds of things. So, you know, there's a challenge when somebody comes into fulfill a role. You know, challenges both with the people and challenges also with the new upcoming leader. I mean, we go through that, you know, in the United Methodist Church every time we go through a pastoral change.
I was
Yeah,
just
but-
thinking of that. Appointments are announced at 1 o'clock every Sunday now, right? It's
Yeah.
season.
Mhm.
But this situation is a little different in that these people have always been around Joshua. So even though it was a transition, it was not like they didn't know Joshua or what he was like. So, you know, I mean, it was probably still scary to some point, but on the other point, they could have been comforted too, because they knew it wasn't somebody else that they didn't know or have been around. So there's that side too.
How old was Joshua at this time?
That's a good question.
Mm.
Yeah, be up there. Not as old as Moses, but
Well, yeah, he went into the promised land as a spy. So if he did that,
Yeah.
Wasn't he the one that told everybody that they could pull it off?
right.
Yep. Hmm.
So let's just say he was 20. So 60 years old.
well, yeah, so I just did a quick Google search, and they think he's probably around 40 to 50 years old.
Okay.
So you know, that's an estimate. Nobody really knows for sure. All right. So as we kind of look at this, then got some questions. All right. So the first is, how does Moses' humility and stepping aside serve as an example for us today?
Well, you should face the adversity with your chin held high. You know, he didn't fight it. He accepted it and passed the torch, and that was that.
Okay.
He knew he couldn't probably give them 100%, so he knew it was time for him to step aside. So at least he knew. He didn't wait until he was asked to leave. He knew when he had done enough or whatever.
But I thought he knew he was not going to go. I thought God had told him before when he struck the rock
Right, he did
that
know.
he would
Right.
not enter the promised land.
Why didn't God let him enter the promised land?
That's a
Because-
good question.
I
Because
mean, he
at the-
most of his life to bring in the Israelites to the promised land, and then when they're ready to step over the border, oh well, you're not going. Like,
Well,
God.
it wasn't quite exactly like that.
Oh, we know that, but
Golden calf involved in that a little bit.
what? I'm sorry, Sue.
I
He
said, was golden calf involved a little bit in that?
All right, we got a couple people talking. So I heard Sue. What do you
Right.
got, Sue?
Wasn't the golden calf involved in a little bit of that?
No, not
No.
quite.
No, it was when he struck for the water.
Right.
Yeah, the
Alan?
water.
Yeah,
Alan?
he was just supposed to speak. So he wasn't supposed to strike it.
Right. So he didn't follow God's commands.
Right.
And so we were there and they were grumping and grousing. God said to command, he didn't command, he hit the rock, and God says, okay, your punishment, you're not going to go into the promised land.
Wow. But yet he kept on going, right? Till they're almost there.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. So, I mean, think about this idea of humility. What would have happened if Moses wasn't a humble guy?
I don't even think he would have gotten as far as he did
Mm-hmm.
if he didn't have humility.
What do you mean he wouldn't have gotten as far as he
I
did?
don't think he would have lasted the whole time coming out of Egypt and through the whole wandering in the wilderness and all that if he didn't have humility.
Okay.
I think he had that trait already instilled in him. And sometimes I feel bad for Moses when he was up there and struck the water or the rock, because I'm thinking maybe he was just having a bad day. But God knew his heart. So that's why he did what he did.
Okay.
So he wasn't having a bad day.
Well, think about it for a minute. I mean, we kind of chuckle that, okay, maybe he was having a bad day, and that could very well be, the thing. But a couple of things with that. One is, he was the leader, right?
Mhm.
But the second, think about our conversation last week. So what was our theme last week?
Choose life.
Choose life so you kind of look at, Moses is on a journey. He's going down a path and you come to a fork in a road. And we all come to those kinds of forks in the road where, you can choose left, you can choose right. And so, as you're there, Moses is talking and says what he wants us to do, what? Choose life. All right. And
Mhm.
so if you're going to choose the path of life, what is the path of life? What did we
It's the path of God, not the path of self. And with humility, he's showing that he's accepting God's will. And the opposite of humility would be where the emphasis is on him.
right?
And without the humility, he'd cause division and chaos. But with humility, it was unison with the people and choosing God.
Right. Yeah, so there's it's exactly what Mark said. There's a couple of things wrapped up in what he just said. And so the one, if we're going to choose the path of life, the scripture says that, we need to follow God's commandments. Okay, we need to follow God. Um, and when we don't do that, it takes us off of that path, and that becomes especially important if you're in a position of leadership. because, if you're in a position of leadership, okay, your decision then not only affects you, but it affects those that are following you. And so, that becomes important. So while it seems to us that, okay, we can chalk it off that maybe he was having a bad day. It just kind of echoes that warning that, the decisions that we make are important ones. Now, yeah, so Mark also talked about this idea of humility, and if Moses wasn't serving or wasn't leading from a place of humility, that it could cause chaos. Why would it cause chaos?
Because some people would be following God, and some people would want to follow Moses, the human. And
Right.
two different camps there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the kind of thing if think about think about Paul for a minute. I don't know right off the top of my head which letter it was. I think it might have been Galatians, but don't hold me to that. One of the challenges that he was having was, there were people, um, different leaders. So there was Paul, there was Apollos, there was Peter, and all of them, were kind of, scrambling. Okay, which one should we follow? And what does Paul say? What you really need to do is follow God. You don't follow a human being.
Mm.
Okay, that each human being is, excuse me, put into place for a specific time and a particular purpose. Like he said, okay, I planted and Apollos watered, and somebody else's gets to harvest. But we kind of run into that a little bit, don't we? We forget that the true leader is God, that the humans are just people that are put in place, to point towards God. And so without that sense of humility, it does create chaos and confusion. Does that happen today?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you think you could put it on the political platform and look at the mess that happens there. But you can see that in a lot of different um, a lot of different venues. I mean, I appreciate when I came to Christ Church that Rev had retired and chose not to come back to the church. Um, because as a younger pastor, getting started, and following somebody had been there, I don't know, gosh, what was he there, 27?
25 years, I think,
How many?
25 at least.
Yeah, I was going to say 27, a good long time.
Mhm.
It was one of those things where, it would become a challenge to really, grow into your own if the previous leader was still there. So, that idea of humility. And I think in our initial conversations, when we're talking about times of transition and what do we need. Somebody mentioned that we need to have the right people on the bus or on the boat, however you choose to look at it. Um, and so with that, having the right people, what does that require?
It requires, well, there's a lot of things, but one is that the leader start delegating or looking out for a successor that can handle it.
Okay. Yep. Yep. That's that. So in some ways, looking for the right, excuse me, gifts and graces.
Well, the opposite side of that coin is true as well. Not only do you want the right leader on the bus, but you want the wrong leader not on the bus.
That is true too.
I mean, training, getting that person ready. Or
Yeah.
people ready, depending on what are the tasks involved.
So if you were Moses and you kind of knew that your time was running short, you could see that you're coming close to the promised land, and you know Joshua was going to take over. What would your approach be?
You take off the training wheels and let them try and ride a little bit and watch and be waiting in the wings in case.
Okay.
I think I would think Moses would be there as a support for him as he's learning the ropes or, finding his way. Perhaps Moses would be there to help him out and be a guide if he needed it.
Okay.
Well, if you're that old, I think you just hand it over and get out of the way and
You don't care.
take his own, praises and falls.
All right.
I would think Moses has been preparing Joshua for quite some time. It wasn't just all of a sudden. I think he was grooming him along. And he could see, I think too, that Joshua was faithful to God and trusted God. So I think, and besides, I think even maybe the two of them, talked about issues and things with the, different problems and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, whoever you're going to hand it over to, you want them to have the same mindset and traits, so to speak. So that you can feel confident that he's leaving them with somebody that's going to really lead them. And it's not going to be about Joshua. I
Okay.
think Joshua's more like Moses.
It's interesting you asked this question today because I heard of a book this morning at a talk called Every Other Thursday. And the subtitle is Stories and Strategies from Successful Women Scientists. And what it's about mentoring. And so this idea of like the leader meeting every other Thursday with this other, this group of people
Excuse me.
getting wisdom from the group, but the same idea that you don't, I don't know, stepping aside is one thing, but also there's this kind of like support system there to make sure everything's going okay. Check-ins, kind of.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that you choose a leader out of nowhere. So I think that over a period of time, there was a selection of individuals that were probable candidates for that role. And eventually Joshua stood out. So I think there was a period of grooming, but at the same time, there was not going to be any divided allegiances. So if the old leader came into the land, there were probably some were still going to be looking at him for guidance, and then that would take away from Joshua. So I think that him staying behind and making a severing that relationship so that Joshua could have that leadership role by himself. But he probably had some grooming before that.
That's all I think, yeah.
Wasn't Joshua the person that
Were
was
the only two people that-
deputized, if you will, when Moses went up the mountain?
Say that when he did what?
Wasn't Joshua the one that was deputized when Moses went up the mountain? And
One of them.
he left him in charge of the people?
Well, it sort of, kind of, but not really.
Yeah.
Actually, he went up the mountain he went up the mountain with Moses part way. The person who was left in charge down below was
Yeah,
Aaron.
his brother was Aaron.
Aaron, okay, yeah,
That's where they got into trouble with the golden calf.
right, right.
And so, yeah, you could say that from, that time Joshua was in a position of kind of presence around Moses. So if we're thinking about this idea of leadership and leadership transition, we see it maybe this model here. Where else in the Bible would we see a good model for transition of leadership?
Isn't this when Jesus was being crucified that he left things to the apostles and to Peter specifically?
Yeah, so I don't know that it would be right at the crucifixion, but where I was going with this is right where you were headed, Mark, is Jesus. If we look at, there was going to be a transition happening. Jesus' earthly ministry was coming to an end. And there's going to be a transfer of leadership to the apostles or disciples. And so, if you look at that, what was the process that Jesus used as he was thinking about his succession plan?
You're talking about like the Great Commission.
Well, no, not even the Great Commission. I'm sort of, spreading it out, not just. So if you look at Jesus and you look at, okay, what did he do? He called the disciples, right? And
Mhm.
then after calling the disciples, there was what? A long period of time.
Yeah, he
before the
transitioned with them for the 3 years of his ministry.
Right. So, and in that time, if you think about that ministry period, what kind of things happened that kind of helped to prepare the disciples as best they could?
Yeah, the walking on the water incident, the healing of the ill.
Right.
I
So,
think going to homes and, instruction, go to this town in twos. If they don't accept you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. But he ministers and he tells parables and they hear it, that they can repeat as we're going on.
right. So if we kind of look at that ministry model, I mean, what did Jesus do? First, Jesus, chose people and invited them to come on this journey. And what did the journey look like? Well, first it was it was a journey of presence. And what did they do? They spent a lot of time together. 3 years. And you kind of think about it, it's not like, you spend some time, it's not like work where you spend 8 hours, you go home and you come back again. They ate, slept, traveled, and hung out together. Okay. And so within that, it was, first and foremost, a journey of presence. But then also in that there was, both instruction, instruction where it was just, listening and teaching, but instruction of just, observing. And then there was also part of that, the challenge that he gave them, okay, I'm going to send you out and I want you to do this. And, gave them, the ability to go out and try, and then brings them back and does what? He debriefs them. And so that same kind of ministry model is the same kind of thing that we see happening here with Moses, and we see it with Joshua. And it takes a real, bit of humility to be able to to serve and prepare someone that way. Now, as we think about that, okay, Moses prepares Joshua. There was some mentoring there. I'm sure there was the presence and all of that kind of stuff, and Joshua, looking, learning, and all that kind of stuff. Also just being inspired by the way Moses lived his life, the way he worked, and that kind of thing. But as much as Moses is preparing Joshua, what's the next important step there? If you think about the disciples, okay, Jesus prepared them, but what's the next important step?
Prepare the people.
Okay. Even before that, Jeanette.
He explains how he has to go and what the results are going to be.
Okay, you're kind of there. So if you think about you could go to the Gospel of John there, and in the Gospel of John we have that long discourse, the closing discourse, and what does he say?
I'll be with you. Abide in me.
Uh-huh. Anything else? Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house, there's many dwelling places, and I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will bring to you where I am. I am not leaving you orphaned. I'm not leaving you alone, but I'm going to send
Holy Spirit.
Holy
the Holy
Spirit.
Spirit.
Be with you.
And the Holy Spirit is going to do what?
Comfort you, or
It's going to, he comforts you, but he's going to help you to remember all of the things that I have taught you. Okay. And so kind of as we look at this transition, Moses leadership transition to Joshua, or even Jesus transition to the disciples, there's all this work and preparing this going on. But, one of the big important steps here is, God's presence. I mean, think about the scripture that we just read here. What does it say?
That the Lord was going to cross first.
Okay. It says, if you look at verse number 6, be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them. Why? For it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Okay. And then if you go down further, I mean, what's the last thing in verse number 8 here? He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. So, as important as that transition is, as, important as the preparation is, with the succession, the biggest thing is the presence of God, and that sense of what's the word? Sense of peace that you get knowing that God is going first, but that God's going with you, and you're going in God's presence and God's power. And so it becomes important as we think about, Moses, what is he doing? He's emphasizing God rather than his own leadership. And so if you get that sense of emphasizing God's presence, what does that do as you're making a leadership transfer?
You're reinforcing that they can handle it and that what you had behind you is they're going to have behind them.
Okay. Uh-huh. I kind of, I kind of look at it in this sense. We just went through a presidential election. Okay. And there's a lot, no matter what side you particularly support, whether it be Democrat, whether it be Republican, um, there's a lot of angst. Okay. A lot of angst if you voted for Biden, a lot of angst if you voted for Trump, right?
Mhm.
But what's the real message that and that we in the church need to embrace?
Country.
God
all
is still in
American.
charge.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not about the person, it's
Mhm.
about God.
Mhm.
And God's presence goes before. God's presence is going to uphold us. God's presence is going to sustain us. Sometimes in spite of, but in sometimes with. And so, in some ways, that transition of leadership matters less than the emphasis on God and God's presence. Thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking with this, and there is an analogy, I guess. No matter which side you were on, as you said, we're all Americans. We need to put it aside and get our thing together. And it's the same thing with the Israelites. I'm sure there was factions. Some people might have wanted somebody besides Joshua.
Absolutely.
They need to knock it off,
Mhm.
work together, and go forward.
Right.
And so, and that, yeah, that's a good point that, typically probably don't think about, Sue, is that, yeah, there probably were, excuse me, factions that supported Joshua, but factions that supported, others. You think about it, this was a very, tribal group of people. And so each individual tribe had their own individual leaders. And I'm sure one would, want their leader over the other. So in that sense of tribalism, how do we overcome that? What's the secret sauce here?
Mm.
I thought there were two tribes that didn't want to go over, but yet Moses said to them, if you go in and conquer it with us, he'll let them
That
go back
Yep,
and
that's
settle in that
yes, that's
land.
true. Yep, there were two.
So but he had them pledge that they would go and fight when they did cross.
Right.
So it was, and of course, you have to work as a team and put God first.
Yeah, I think, uh and so what does it look like putting God first?
Accepting Joshua in this case.
Okay, yeah, in some ways it's accepting Joshua, but I think in some ways it's that constant reminder, it's about God and it's not about the leader. And that I think that is kind of also tied to this idea of humility. Where did, if you think about it, where did Moses' humility come from? I would hope that it was born out of his relationship with God.
Mhm.
So, what do we learn about preparing for transitions from Moses' instructions? Because you think about it, as Sue said, this is very apropos for what's going on today, when we think about, from a political sense. But it's also one of those things, there's always, does anybody's life here never involve transitions?
No,
What the one thing in life that's certain is that there's always going to be
Change.
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 And so we're always going through
Death and
transitions.
taxes, right?
Yeah, death and
Okay.
taxes. Yeah. So what can we learn? Because it's important.
Expect that change will happen and be willing to accept that God will see us through.
Okay.
Or as they say on the street, put up and shut up.
Okay. I think, think about our conversations, it involves a sense of humility. Also, a sense of, you know, a calm presence in the midst of chaos, as Mark said, change creates chaos.
And you always say God's in charge, so I
Mhm.
guess you have to look at it as too. God's in charge; He's in control. So you have to just sort of let go and let God, kind of, I guess.
Yep. 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 So all those things are kind of important to Israelites that are making a change, Americans that are making a change, United Methodists who make changes every year with their pastoral appointments, folks that are, in transition at maybe their jobs or whatever it happens to be. All right. So if we look at this, Moses constantly encourages the Israelites to be strong and courageous, and that strength and courageousness comes because they understand, realize, and know that they're going with the presence of God. Okay. And so courage really isn't really the absence of fear, but it's trust in God's power and promises. So, if we think about that, what does it mean to be strong and courageous in the face of change?
Or just to accept the change and know that God's going to do right with you.
Okay.
If it's the real change, put aside your own issues,
Okay.
which is hard.
Oh,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
I think
I don't
it's
know how to word this exactly, but doesn't that mean also that's where you build your relationship with God, that one-on-one relationship? Because to be strong and courageous and things of in a face of change or uncertainty, at least for me, I got to talk to God.
Yep.
Get through it.
So what does it mean to be strong and courageous in the face of uncertainty? And so, and that's kind of related to the next question. How can we trust God's presence when stepping into the unknown situations? Okay. Does it just happen out of happenstance? No, it happens out of, having a relationship with God. It comes as Chris said, with that, begins with that kind of one-on-one time where you get to know when we talk a lot about this idea of trust and what does it take to build trust. It takes, not only, that relationship, but, think about the study that we've done. Think about, if you look at maybe the Torah, or the Pentateuch um, in total, what do we see of God each time? So, we have that history. And so we begin to trust because we see a history of God that continues to show up, a God that continues to work, a God that has worked in our lives before, a God that has worked in maybe our family's life, our church's life, those kinds of things. And so, all of those things that go into building trust, okay, are the building blocks to become strong and courageous in the face of change and uncertainty.
Mm.
And so, you need to put the work in, on the front side before you get to this stuff, because what happens if you don't have that trust in God's presence? Can you be strong and courageous?
Mhm.
No, you're going to crash and you're going to burn.
Mhm.
All right. So, any other thoughts about this? Any examples of when you trusted God's presence that helped you through a transition?
I think when I was let go from QVC, it was a whole, I mean, that's when they had their big layoff back in 09. And I'll never forget, they called department after department down, and they had all these departments in this big area. And they made the announcement that we were all going to be let go. And I remember, oh my gosh, the people crying in tears, and it was horrible. And I just sat there and thought, yeah, but we'll get through this. God closes one door, he opens another. It's not the end of the world. It was a shock. I think it was a shock to everybody, but we all got through it.
Mm-hmm.
We did get through it. So, you know, and went through with it last December, a year ago, December, with Roger. Never thought. I mean, I know nobody's job is, but because it was just him and another guy doing this job, and you just didn't think, it would happen. And here they were both let go.
Mm.
And they went with the manufacturers to come in and do the work. So now they weren't going to get their 24/7 care, but now it didn't matter anymore. So, and it was scary, but I just praying about it,
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm one who never deals with change very well. But I know after my divorce, I had to go look for a job. And I hadn't worked for like 9 years. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And I went to a couple of job interviews, banks and stuff. And then I got this one interview this one day for an insurance adjuster of all things. And
Huh.
it was the girl I was going to work with. She was the office manager, but she was also the wife of one of the owners of the business. And she was my age. We had a lot in common. And on the way home, I just prayed. I said, I really liked the way the interview went. I said, God, if this is the job for me, have them call me. And I just sort of put it in his hands. And I walked in the front door and the phone was ringing. And I answered the phone, and it was them telling me I had the job if I wanted it. And it was one of the best jobs I ever had. I had so much fun at that job. Plus, the owner was just the nicest guy. And it was, I hated to lose that job when that place closed, but but I had to put my trust in God. I didn't know what else to do. I had to find a job and, you know, so, and he, as always, he answers my prayers and comes to my rescue.
I remember when I first came to Christ Church,
Hmm.
that wasn't my first request to be appointed somewhere. I was quite content at Mount Hope, being an associate pastor. And I think I was actually called twice to ask to serve at two other churches before the call came for Christ Church. And I remember when Violet Fisher had called, I was actually, it was during the summer. I was at seminary with my friend Mark. Anybody that's going to be at church on Sunday will meet. If you haven't met Mark, you'll meet him. He's going to share the baptism of Brooke with me. And he was helped also shared my when Sarah got married.
Yeah, so yeah.
He was my my seminary roommate for years. And so Violet called while I was there and said, I need to talk to you and Judy. And so anytime a district superintendent wants to talk with you and your spouse, it's about being moved.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I'm in Washington at Wesley. She goes, well, when do you come home? On Saturday. All right, I'd like to see you on Saturday afternoon. And so that whole time that we're there, Mark is ribbing me the whole time. Oh yeah, you're going to be a pastor. You're going to be having your own church. You're going to have to go scrub the floors. You're going to have to do that.
Just about.
And so I remember that, Judy and I went to Violet's office, and she asked about us considering moving to Christ Church. It's like, I don't even know that. I've never heard of that church. Broomall. I know where Broomall is, but I've actually never really been to Broomall. And so, she said she wanted us to consider it. So we actually left her office and drove to the church and sat in the parking lot and prayed. And I remember that, all of the other times I had been asked to move is a really unsettling. But this time there was something different. There was this peace, and it's like we looked at each other and said, yeah, this is the place that we're being called to be. And when you do something like that, especially going from Mount Hope will always have a special place in my heart. It's where I got married. It's where the kids were baptized, and all of that kind of good stuff. And I was comfortable there. But there's scary times, but knowing that there's this peace, knowing that God goes before and that God goes with you, and it's going to be all right. It's an important thing. Because all of us go through transitions. All of us will go through times where we're called to be courageous. So I think, one of the things it's going to happen, it's inevitable. And I think as Chris said, it's important to put the work in beforehand to cultivate trust. So, in those times that God is faithful. All right. We're at our time, and I know Debbie needs to go have a date with a telescope, and she's going to drag Mark along. Go look at this little red dot that's right by the sun.
Moon.
Uh, so everybody have a great night.
Everybody can go out and see it too. Should be
What-
clear up there. I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, everybody go do it. On Sunday, there'll be a test.
Okay, everybody bring your little picture on
Yeah.
your phone.
Don't forget your recording there.
Oh, thank you. It'll
Oh,
stop.
the
It'll
recording,
stop
yeah.
when I stop.
And talk about transition. Keep those people out in California in prayer.
Mm.
That's